I'm ready.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining the NCICE webinar this evening. We have Dr. Robyn Dean here to present this evening. She is an assistant professor at the National Technical Institute for the Deaf. As many of you know, Robyn has focused much of her research and presentation on demand control schema. However, we are going to be focusing on some of her work this evening, focusing on her PhD and some of the information that has been presented from that and how it applies to metaethics within our field as interpreters. Before we get started with our webinar, I want to talk a little bit about NCIEC and our organization. The next slide, please, Carrie. And next. I am Amy Williamson, and I am the instructor coordinator for the Marie Center in Colorado. The Marie Center is one of the 5 regional centers that I will show a map of that shortly, but I wanted to send up a little of this technical information. If you bring up the PowerPoint, you'll see some of the technical approaches as to how you can adjust the sizes of the screen, how you can control your chat box, and how you can communicate directly with the organizers if a technical problem shows up or if you're having some kind of issues, you can type to us. Dr. Dean will also be fielding questions from that chat box, probably within the last 15 to 20 minutes of that. So don't feel like you have to type those now. We'll let you know when to go ahead and type your questions as we go forward with this presentation. I know many of you are here for the RIDCUs this evening and taking advantage of that for the webinar, and that is completely fine. You will get an email with an evaluation in that, so keep an eye on that and please make sure you fill those out. We will also be comparing the attendance list from this evening with the responses that we get from those emails so that you will get your CEUs. So make sure to keep an eye on that from your email box. I know some of you have already possibly gotten a sign-up sheet or attendance sheet, and that will that'll be for this class, and then we'll make sure that we share that with Carrie when we're complete. Next slide, please. And next. NCICE is in a consortium that we are really looking at improvements in interpreter education, technical assistance, communication, and a wide variety of other areas where we can help interpreters in general. And these are part of some of our goals. Next slide. As you can see in the PowerPoint, it will show where our centers are throughout the United States. We have the National Center in Northeastern University. We have the Marie Center in Colorado. Our Western Regional Center is WRIEC in Western Oregon University. Next slide, please. So without further ado, we are thrilled to be bringing you Dr. Robyn Dean and her Returning to Ethics. a metaethical analysis of community interpreting codes and standards of practice. Welcome, Dr. Dean. Hello, everybody. This is Robyn speaking. I would like to make sure that I'm monitoring Kate and Peggy, our two interpreters this evening, making sure that they're communicating with me in the chat box. Just want to make sure that the light is good for them at the screen and has a good area. So I will be looking at the chat box from time to time because that is where I will be getting communication from my two sign language interpreters this evening. Next slide, please, Carrie. I would like to address the fact that I don't have a sign for underwear. I lived in Scotland for about 3 years, and I took a British Sign Language class while I was there. And one of the instructors asked what the sign for that particular concept was. I thought a minute. Then I realized I didn't have a sign for underwear. And everybody in the room was kind of taken aback by that. And so was I. I've been signing American Sign Language since about the age of 11. I've been interpreting 25 plus years. I'm assuming at some point in that career, someone has given me or taught me a sign for underwear. And yet, I couldn't come up with it on the spot. A lot of individuals use American Sign Language in a lot of different areas. I am an interpreter, mostly in the medical field. Often it comes up in an OBGYN setting when I have to sign the concept of removing clothing or underwear for a doctor's exam. But yet, that sign is not something that necessarily had come up recently in some of my work. Next slide, please. So let's focus on the elephant in the room. If you look at my slide, he's standing there. The concept of elephant in the room means that there's something big in a situation or a setting, but often individuals don't want to talk about it or address it. And I know myself as an individual, sometimes I do ignore the elephant, but other times I want to address it directly. And for example, today, in general, it is the concept of signing my presentation. In general, I do not sign my presentation. When NCIEC approached me about presenting a webinar, I immediately said yes, that I would be willing to present. However, when it came to signing my presentation, I had asked for interpreters. And I knew where Amy and other individuals were coming from as far as providing language access to the information. And that was where I was coming from as well. So I was concerned about access, but I didn't want to sign my presentation. They were concerned about access and wanting me to sign my presentation. So we had the same goal in different approaches. Next slide, please. Often individuals use the concept of signing their presentations, and I could, but would really me signing my presentation approach the concept of full access. I do work at the Deaf Wellness Center, and we have focused a lot on what the concept of sign language access to concept is. We often at the Deaf Wellness Center get asked by a wide variety of organizations to translate their information on their website, or a videotape that has been presented by people in spoken English, and they approach the Deaf Wellness Center to translate, and often we are resistant to that. What we focus on is more adapting the information rather than simply translating it. Next slide, please. As you see on my PowerPoint, the concept of honestly translating and getting the meaning of what the information is. Often that meaning needs to be completely adapted into the different language, including all that it entails. It's not just looking at the printed English or spoken English and simply signing it into American Sign Language. It is more than that. And then you'll see on the PowerPoint of the article that we published about that exact concept. Next slide, please. Oh, could we go back? There we go. Thank you. The first 3 points of this website are really about adaptation-related publications. And often how people have the concept of adapting. But the information that often is adapted is still based on English and how it was researched and founded within the English language. So I did go and decide that I was going to sign my presentation this evening. But I didn't want to base it just on my English literature and my English PhD and things like that. That was not what I wanted to do. I really did have all this information that I have presented in spoken English multiple times. Take that information that I already was very comfortable with and established with and reinvent all of that information into an ASL presentation. I couldn't start in the same place that I had started with my spoken English presentation. Next slide, please.
So perhaps you'll find yourself at an RID conference, a CIT conference, and you'll see people signing, presenting. Sometimes you might notice that some people are struggling, and they may be fine and comfortable with the actual signs themselves, but it's the changing from English to ASL. It's which language you're starting from, which source you're starting from. More and more nowadays, when you see presentations, you see them done in American Sign Language. But often you'll see that the information is, you may see the information comes from English and goes into ASL. It's adapted into ASL. And sometimes it's conceived in ASL. As for myself this evening, what I tried to do was I had my PowerPoint, I had my slides, but what I wanted to do was to really reinvent this information so that I could communicate it in American Sign Language. And doing that is different than looking at my English information. We'll see if that works or not this evening. Next slide. Another very popular place to see people signing and presenting is street leverage. And again, you might want to take note of if those presenters are starting with the English message and changing that into ASL, or if they are beginning with the ASL message. This is just something you can do on your own to research. Next slide, please. So a presentation that is conceived in English is going to follow English thought patterns. And you can put that into American Sign Language. Kind of like when you hear the word Spanglish. It's in Spanish, but it's got English influence. And a question for you to research is, how does it work better if the person starts in English and adapts it into ASL, or if they start in ASL and then do the presentation from there? Yeah. Academic ASL is another area. I don't know much about this myself, but I've heard and read some about it. I'm not skilled in that area myself, but that is another area that might be a way for deaf individuals, native users, to access a presentation. And next note. A presentation may start in English because it might be something that is taken from an article, a book, from literature, and that information may be used for the presentation. It could be adapted into sign language. But a presentation that is not a presentation conceived in ASL, that is one that is adapted into ASL. So it would be good for you to research and figure out what is most accessible. How are these different kinds of presentations more or less accessible? I would think that it would be more accessible to if something was created in American Sign Language and presented from that, those concepts, if the concepts were presented from that perspective. Next slide. So you might be saying, Robyn, how is all of this information that you're giving us related to your presentation? It may seem not relevant on the surface, But once we dig deeper into these ideas, you'll see that they're quite related to what we're talking about this evening. The topics are quite related. Next slide. Let's say, if you'd like to see my English PowerPoint for this presentation, or the articles that I've just referenced, I'd be happy to send those out. And you would be able to compare what I have on paper and what I'm presenting tonight. The points would be the same, covered in both, but the approaches would be quite different. Often if we want to change behavior, we start talking about shoulds and shouldn'ts, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, what behaviors we should show. That is not very successful. If we really want to change behavior, we need to back up and talk about our thoughts, our feelings. The words that we use, the words that we speak or sign, show us interesting things about how we behave. How we talk and how we sign about our behavior, how we communicate, is very important. It's very important. Next slide. Our profession, our field of interpreting, we talk a lot about ethics. The words that we use tell us a lot. And these words come from quite a long time ago. Next slide, please. And one more click. Great. RAD in 1979, before like 1964, from 1964 to 1979, we saw a change in the Code of Ethics, and then in 2005 again. But in 1979, from that period of time until 2005 was the longest time that we saw a set Code of Ethics. And even when it changed, there were a lot of similarities from the original Code of Ethics to the one that we moved to. In the 1970s, the thought was that an interpreter should be a conduit. That was the philosophy. Next slide. We compared ourselves to glasses. It's the lens that we look through to see ourselves as conduits. This is how we understand our role as conduits, the lens that we look through. This is the metaphor that we use. Next slide. And next. Then in the 80s, we said, you know, maybe conduit isn't exactly it. Maybe we're more of a communication facilitator. So we had a new lens to look at our role through. We didn't really change the role, but we had a new lens that we were looking through to talk about our behavior, to understand the choices that we make. And then, next slide. Then we moved into the by mediator role. So we've had the same code of ethics, but we kept changing our behavior. Our lens changed. And so now the lens that we're looking through is the by mediator lens. And we see different behavior. Or do we? Next slide. So later we talked about the role of being a team member. We talk about being an ally. And if you research the literature from translation, interpreting, various fields of study, you'll see many other titles for what it means to interpret, different metaphors, different lenses to look at interpreting through. Next slide. All these lenses, all these different perspectives, all these concepts being thrown at us for what our role is, what our behaviors should be. Next slide.
So what are we really trying to say with these different metaphors that have been thrown at us over the years? I think what we are trying to say is that one metaphor is not enough to truly explain what an interpreter does with our behavior, that we needed more to really have options. And I think that was one of the points. Also, another point of this variety of lenses and metaphors was that our behavior has to be flexible based on where we are. Also, the concept of that our thoughts and our ideas have changed throughout the years within this profession. The American Translation Association, ATA, actually did hire me to give a presentation. And it happened, not summer, but fall time. And they wanted to interview me for a blog to kind of announce my presentation. The interviewer approached me and asked, Robyn, as a member of the team, and again, that is a popular metaphor that we see, what do you think will be the next one for community interpreters? And what's next as a member of the team? My response to that was to actually, if we can drop all the metaphors that we use in our field. And really, that is my long-term hope. Next slide, please. And next, please. So again, these multiple lenses, the conduit lens, the by lens, the ally, all of these metaphors that we have looked at are really not interesting. What is more interesting is to take a step back from those lenses and dissect why we use them in our profession. Next slide, please. And next, please. If a physician or a nurse does their wide variety of behaviors during their workday, for example, they are using a transcriber, We don't say that at that moment they're acting like a journalist. Next. Excellent. Or if that same nurse is sitting with a patient and explaining a new prescription or some kind of procedure or their specific patient's disease, we suddenly don't say, well, that physician is behaving like a teacher. Next, please. Or if that exact same doctor in that afternoon is at a patient's bedside, we don't suddenly say that they're functioning like a chaplain. Next slide. And for that same medical profession, we don't say they are acting like a god or a deity when that particular medical profession is providing positive outcomes to their patients or that their patient is now cured. That's not what we say. But the behavior is different for that one medical profession, but we don't change the metaphor that we use to describe what they're doing. Next slide. Metaethics and the study of metaethics takes a step back and looks at the lens itself that we use to look at ethics. It also compares and contrasts a wide variety of ethical code. Some examples would be PhD students that focus on metaethics. That is one example who does use that. Yes, next slide, please. Next, please. Yes, yes. And one more. And yeah, this is good. Thank you. So we have a wide variety of contributors to ethics. For example, linguistic philosophers use the concept of metaethics. Sociologists also are interested in ethics and contribute to ethics, but they are focused on behavior. And one more click, please. And they also focus on descriptive ethics. So we have the ethicists. We have the sociologists. And we also have the philosophers. They all contribute to ethics, but they don't call them the same thing. Could you click 3 times, please, Carrie? Philosophers are focusing on metaethics. The ethicists are focusing on normative, policy, procedures, politics. That is the normative ethics. Sociologists focus on descriptive ethics. I'll go through each one of these individually. Next slide, please, Carrie. And next, click. Normative ethics focus on the ought-tos, that these particular individuals should or ought to be doing something. Next, click, Carrie. The next is the descriptive ethics, which is what people actually do. It isn't necessarily about right or wrong. It is about what these individuals are doing and the behavior that they're presenting. And finally, metaethics is the constructs and terms used to conceive and articulate what we are doing. Yes, next slide. So I know many of you may be sitting there going, why are we talking about this? And why are we putting these things into 3 different categories? But I want to go back to one of the designs that was in earlier in my presentation. Carrie, could you click down, please? Again, going through these distinctive areas of ethics is we have to go back and realize that how we think about things can affect the words that we use, how we talk about these things. So again, if we would like to change how people are behaving, it's more about going back and focusing on the thinking. What is the thinking behind our communicating and therefore how we're behaving? One word we hear often within our field is role. Carrie, could you click 4 times, please, I believe. This word is repeatedly used in our profession. But often I want to focus on how we use it. Next slide, Carrie. Often we hear interpreters say, it is my role to do such and such behavior, such and such this. And I often don't hear that in a positive approach. Again, in my PhD research, we see role is used in a very negative connotation, or the lack of taking action, rather than in the positive or justifying an interpreter taking action. Next slide, Carrie. So taking a step back and really researching where that word comes from. Role actually comes from a script that is given to an actor as they're about ready to perform. Click again, Carrie. So R-O-L-E actually is a derivative of R-O-L-L, which was a rolled up piece of paper that was given to an actor in the theater so that they knew their role. So they unrolled that script and they knew what their character was going to be in that particular play. So if you go back to the original meaning of that term, that is what that means. Next slide, Carrie. So imagine that that term, role, comes out and how that affects our feelings, our thoughts, and our behaviors, as you see on this slide. Next slide, Carrie. If you could go back once, Carrie. Apologize. Excellent. So if we put role into this slide, so how we talk about our things, the concept of if we go out or go beyond that role, and how does that affect our thinking and our behavior as professionals? And next slide. And could you click again, Gary? Thank you. And once more. So some of you may be thinking that other professions use the concept of role, and they do, but they use it in the concept of the function of that profession. Descriptive ethics uses role in a very different light. Next slide, please. In the field of sociology, the concept of role is a set of normative behaviors that are to be expected, consistently performed by a given person. For example, I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm an interpreter, I'm a friend. I play within my life a wide variety of roles, and within each of those roles, my behavior can be predictable. If I'm in my mother role, I would behave in such and such a way. If I was a daughter, I may exude these behaviors, etc., etc. But that is different than the concept of function. Someone's function is quite simple. Example coming from early theorist Erving Goffman, the participation frame and his theory of participation framework has been consistently used in translation and interpreting research since the 1980s. But again, that goes back to the concept of descriptive ethics.
So the role of interpreter, what is it? Tell one person what the other person said in another language. Seems simple enough, right? That's all it is, really. But really, it's so much more than that. Yes, we do convey what one person says to the other, and that's part of our role. But from a functional viewpoint, we have to use different terminology. And the meaning behind the words is quite different if we use different terminology. So I want to show you a few different quotes from professionals in various fields. And I want you to decide, I want you to look at it and think, if we replace the word role with function, would it feel the same or different? If we're talking about behavior, expectations, or are we talking about function, and which feels better? Next slide. So following Angelelli, if we say our role, the most problematic issue of our role is telling one person what the other person said, that doesn't seem to follow. But if we say that we always must have the same function in every role, that is an issue. And then the next quote. The next quote mentions that interpreters don't have a problem with ethics. The problem they have is with the role. So interpreters have a problem saying what one person is saying to the other person? That's really not the issue. It's when the interpreter is forced to follow the same standards, expectations, and behavior in every situation. That is an issue of concern. And then the final point. So the burning issue for interpreters, according to this quote, is that of role. So that means the burning issue, the hot topic that we talk about is sharing what one person says to the other. No, the issue is the function of the interpreter and how it changes depending on the situation that they are in. So how we use this word role, it's very different when we use it in descriptive ethics versus normative ethics. And so what? Let's talk about that. Next slide. I want to take a moment here and just check lighting. Can everyone see me okay? Unfortunately, we are starting right around the time of sunset, and the lighting has changed quite a bit. So we started, 6:30, 6:45, and the light has changed quite a bit since then. So is everything still good? Can you still see me clearly enough? If I can get a little feedback on that? Okay, good. So if you have any questions or comments for me, that's great. You can just write them down now. I would say just write them down so that you don't forget them. That would help a lot. You can type them or just write them down, and even comments on if you agree or disagree, and then we'll discuss those later. So a popular topic in talking about roles is this role space. Llewellyn Jones and Lee, you can see in the diagram here, we have the two arrows in a cross pattern and then the other arrow through it. So you have your alignment on the horizontal arrow, and you have your presentation of self on that diagonal arrow. So of these words, which one sounds like the sociological construct?
These are all sociological constructs. The interaction, presentation of self, and alignment. They are all from the study of sociology. They're not necessarily normative ethics. They are descriptive ethics, and they serve a great function in that concept of descriptive ethics. But when you start talking about decision-making and aligning yourself with something, it's not necessarily a should, and that functions. The shoulds and the ought tos go under normative ethics rather than descriptive ethics. So these terms that we're seeing on this PowerPoint are simply descriptive terms and functions. Next slide, please.
And the next one. So you have the job, the role that you do, and your behavior. And we can evaluate behavior.
So descriptive ethics is not necessarily about the concept of evaluation as to whether a behavior is good or bad. Descriptive ethics is about discovering and explaining. It is a metaphor for how people function. If we go back to the concept of Pym, P-Y-M, and his research, I'm going to back up and clarify a bit. So the blurb about the webinar, I quoted Pym, P-Y-M. And he said within the interpreting and translation profession that we have enough description. We need more evaluation and judgment. We have plenty of description and descriptive ethics. But where we start coming about into evaluation and decision making is where we need more strength.
Are you familiar with this TV show called Arrested Development? Have you seen it? Do you see the girl that's there in the circle? Her name is Maybe, spelled M-A-E-B-Y. Sounds like the word maybe. And then her parents, you see in this other red circle there, they decide that their child is a very sensitive one and they don't want to send her to a regular school. They want something a little more liberal, a little more laid back, a little more progressive. And Maybe's report card, you'll see in just a moment, if we can go to the next click. Instead of saying she gets an A, a B, or a C in math, I mean, saying that would hurt Maybe's feelings. So instead they say, maybe math makes Maybe feel, and you see the sunshine and a cloud. We're not sure what that means exactly, but we're using the sun and a cloud to talk about math. We don't know if that means she understands math or if she's average at it or how she's doing in it, but we have an image of a sun and a cloud. And then next for science, science makes Maybe feel, we have this face with the open mouth. We're not really sure what it means, but it's a humorous show. And the point of this and showing you the report card is that those words don't really connect to evaluation. Those aren't typical words that we use for evaluative purposes. And next. And in the same way, the metaphors that we're using are descriptive ethics. They're descriptors, that's all. They're not normative ethics. So these different metaphors we use are descriptors. Next slide. So we have these metaphors, these words that we have used repeatedly, but they aren't really working well for us. Next click. We have the normative list of words, the rules, the shoulds, the should nots, all of those things. And then we're putting these descriptive ethics in with it. I mean, we want people to be flexible. We want them to show right behaviors, of course. But the words that we're using between normative and descriptive ethics are not matching up with one another. Next. And next again. So the metaphor is not working. The roles that we're talking about are not necessarily working. So what should we use? What should we do? Well, we have rules. That's normative ethics, but we have rules, but we have more than that. And if we could click again. Behind those rules, we have values and principles. The rules are a list of the do's and don'ts, but the values really show us, they help us to understand where we can be flexible in situations, in different environments, and how we can proceed or perhaps pull back. Next. We can talk about consequences, negatives and positive consequences of situations. That is looking at normative ethics. We can talk about responsibilities. Responsibility is a great word, good for us to talk about in our field, right? This next set of words, incommensurable values. This phrase comes from Aristotle. And he said that deciding what is right and wrong is easy. However, making a decision is hard because most of the time sometimes we have two rights. It's not always a right and a wrong. And yet, even if you have two rights, you can't do both things. You have to pick one and let go of the other. For example, with interpreting, you might have a situation where you didn't quite catch what someone said. So you might make a decision not to interrupt. And the reason you may do that is the person that you're interpreting for may be upset or crying. It might be a very emotional moment. And so you might just say to your other participant, there was a word in there that I missed, I'm very sorry. That might be the role that you take on as interpreter, or the decision you make as interpreter. Or you may decide to interrupt. So when you make one choice, you have to let go of the other one. Both are right choices, but you can't have both at the same time. They may be in conflict with one another.
So all of these options require thinking. So if you're working with rules, you do one rule, it means this, and I have to apply to a particular situation. Or if you look at values, you have to realize that how those function particularly in our variety of situations. Or if you have a value conflict, how do you handle that? Particularly if you have multiple, and then you look at the consequences of each of those values that you follow, and following which is the better consequence, quote unquote. Or you're looking at the responsibilities and the responsibilities of all these individuals. So all of these pieces here in normative ethics require thought. And again, going back to that quote of not my role, that's fine. And we can apply that. But I think we need to look at a different approach, incorporating normative ethics. Carrie, could you click again, please? For example, suppose someone invites the interpreter out to eat from a particular situation, or they are presenting food or at a meeting. And we look at the rule and the interpreter can't participate, but does it really mean this particular setting? And that's the thinking that we have to try and incorporate within our work. The next one down could be value, where someone is saying not my role could be the value that you're presenting. For example, with other professions, they say role, but it may be what we're looking at not practicing outside our area of expertise, where other professions say that rather than saying not my role. Well, we as interpreters can incorporate that, particularly if we're looking at specialized settings and where we have our expertise or not have our expertise. It's more of a negotiation rather than just stepping back and saying, well, this isn't my role. It's what is my area of knowledge and expertise. So again, this requires thinking and a different approach. Carrie, the next one, please. We also have multitudes of options in predicting what are the consequences and which of the consequences that we're facing may be better for the participants. Again, it requires thinking and evaluative approach to our work. Responsibility is another way to approach. Yes, we are there to facilitate communication. But if an individual asks us a question, rather than responding, not my role, can we look at it in a more broader sense of what is our responsibility as the interpreter? Again, requiring thinking and evaluation. And again, the final one, incommensurable values. You have multiple values within the decisions that we're making. Which one are we putting over the other? And which one has a more positive effect? And which value is forfeited as those decisions are made? So many of you might think that I am saying that all the metaphors may belong in the bin. But many of them have been around for multitudes of years, and descriptive ethics have published a wide variety of ethics within that field. And we don't want to toss all of that valuable research out. But what we must do is adapt it and really start processing and thinking how those metaphors are applied to our work and what is the meaning behind what we are saying when we use those metaphors. That is my challenge today. It's not to throw out all of these metaphors that we've been using, but what is the value? What is the knowledge that we are trying to gain and express when we use them? Carrie, there we go. Thank you. So that metaphor, conduit. But what are the values behind that when someone says it? If I'm using evaluative language and coming up on that metaphor, that I am the conduit interpreter, but can I say that it is rather using that, but express the value of we're respecting the deaf person's autonomy, their agency, their self-determinacy, their independence as an individual? Is that what we're getting behind that conduit metaphor? But that's not necessarily where we need to apply the metaphor, but if we can express the values that we're looking at, autonomy, agency, self-determinacy, those are all values that other professions already know. You're not necessarily approaching that value that other profession is saying, well, I'm just operating as a conduit. They won't necessarily understand that or really understand the value that we're getting behind it. So applying it to normative ethics rather than using descriptive ethics. Next example, the very popular one. I, as the interpreter, am a member of the team. But what does that mean exactly? Why do we as an interpreter say that? There is several standard practice papers that are out and published. One is focusing on medical, education, and mental health. All of these are borrowing from the metaphor, a member of the team. But what does that exactly mean, and what are the values that we're trying to express? Do we all get t-shirts? Do they all say team across the front? Yay! So think about the values behind that. And again, that goes back to the normative ethics. What are the values of that setting, and what is I, as an interpreter, responsible for those values? So I have to take a step back and think, if I'm working in a medical profession, what are those values? If I'm working in an educational setting, what are those values that I'm going to incorporate within my work? Transparency may be one. My decisions will be impacted based on those values within that setting, that I need to keep everyone informed as to how I'm approaching the work. And it's not just going forward and thinking, oh, that these values don't apply to me, but how can we use normative ethics approach to really express what is behind the team member metaphor? The last one, please, Carrie. Yeah, that's exactly my point. So we have the conduit, we have the team member, and then finally, the cultural mediator. What are these values that we're seeing, that we're getting behind these metaphors? Next slide, please. So going back to the conduit and member of the team, those two metaphors that we often see. So the next time you see somebody use those, or when you watch my webinar again in September 12th, we will go much more in depth into this. If you don't feel that you have the time to be able to join that, that's fine. It will be recorded again and you will have access to it at a later date. But I will go more in depth into some of my research and the understanding of these two metaphors and how we can apply normative ethics to those. I really would like to open up to those concepts within the next 2 weeks. Next slide, please. Yes, respecting another's autonomy. That is a great value that we can incorporate into our profession. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we look at our individuals that we work with and say, good luck, and just walk away. So we talk about the positive and negative consequences of what can affect. And also the concept of enabling, and how do we focus on the positive or the negatives. For example, we have a doctor and a patient, and the doctor says that you have multiple options for treatments, and they go through these treatments. Which one do you want? That's not necessarily a whole focusing on autonomy, because we would have to go into much more of an advancement of what the treatment is so that the deaf individual would understand what these options are. Where compared to if the doctor would go into, if you choose this treatment, such and such and such and such would happen, and if you choose that treatment, such and such would happen, etc. So now giving them all of that information and then allowing the person to make that individual. But the doctor takes on that responsibility of expanding on each of those treatments. But we talk about the obligation of making sure that all of that is explained and the positiveness of our approach. Next one, Carol. I think we're, yeah. The metaphor of being a team member, again, going back to the values behind that, often the values of the setting that the interpreter walks into as a community-based interpreter. What are the overarching values of that setting? And that they must be something that I consider as an interpreter working in that environment. Okay, go ahead, Carrie. Go ahead and click through to the bottom of this slide. Oh, perfect. You can read these for yourself. Again, in September 12th, we will talk much more about that, about cooperation and collaboration. And I'm not saying that, you know, we all have to sing Kumbaya together. That's not what I mean. But how do we collaborate within these areas that we work in, and how do we take on those values, or at least be aware and understand those values into these settings of where we go, and how our professional values and their professional values can work together. And it's not easy, and it takes work, and it develops, that thought process takes work and develops over time. I do think often our profession is behind in this realm. We are not given the tools or the vocabulary to really speak in this way, because so long we've focused on descriptive ethics rather than normative ethics. Next slide, please. Again, September 12th, we will go much more in depth to these concepts, but we'll really focus more on what to expect, how we can focus on these values of the interpreter profession and our other environments or arenas that we go into, maybe the legal or mental health or medical. How do we take on those values, or at least be aware of those values, and be realizing the challenges that can be put forth by bringing our values into these settings. I think I need to end. We can go through, and I think there's 6 clicks, if I remember correctly. Excellent. Hold right there. These are very standard values that we see. We even see them within the Canadian Sign Language Organization. We see them in a wide variety of translation organizations. These are the values that we see incorporated within these agencies. But as an interpreter walking into a community setting and realizing that sometimes the values that we're walking into because of the entities that we're working in may be different from what we see as the typical values of interpreters or translators. So suppose we transitioned to a normative approach and values within our profession. What would that look like? What is behind that ally metaphor? What is the concept of cooperation? Again, it doesn't mean that everybody gets along and goes out to coffee. It may mean that there will be struggles, and how do we work through those in a collaborative approach? But I want to put everything on hold and do a time for question and answer. I believe Amy is going to pop up on your screen and be signing your questions and comments that are coming up on the chat box here.
All right, thank you so much. And we do have a couple of questions. We have about 10 minutes left. And so we'll do some question and response. We have a few questions that have already come up in the feed, but you have actually answered some of the questions, so we're going to wait and give people a little bit more time to think about the presentation this evening, to develop some new questions, and if you could write them out, Robyn will be ready to respond to them then. One question that was already in the feed related to the role, that this was a new aha moment. Your description of the role helped the person to have a better understanding of what role means. In an educational situation, if you have a job as, if you have a member of the, they were saying that sometimes that job will use member of the team to add duties as assigned. So you have specific expectations, and if we're a community interpreter, sometimes we want to remain just in the interpreting role, but if you're in a school setting, sometimes they'll add other responsibilities to that. If we could hold on, could we hold on 1 second? Just briefly, if I could respond. One problem that we find for legal interpreting, educational interpreters, we have all these different classifications of interpreters, but we all basically follow the values of interpreting. We follow the values of the situation that we are put into, and we carry out those responsibilities, even though that, yes, we do have different things that look differently depending on the situation we're in, but the goal always remains the same. So I just wanted to add that briefly. Absolutely. And if you are staff compared with a contracted interpreter, that would also make a difference, but we still have the same goal in mind. Absolutely, yes, but then again, staff sometimes feels they may have a better understanding of they may be more loyal to the situation and have a better understanding of the overarching values. But we may have different feelings about it. We may have a sense of guilt that we take on sometimes and wonder if we're doing the right thing. We do have one question that asks about what your opinion is about the code of ethics and if it should be changed to incorporate this mindset, and if so, how would we adapt that? I'm sorry, there's a moth flying around. I feel bad. You're watching me try and slap this moth away on TV here. Anyway, it's fine. Don't worry about it, Robyn. It's fine. So what to say? Let me gather my thoughts. So we talk about intermediate ethical concepts, intermediate ethics, intermediate ethical concepts. We have the broad set of values, and then we go down to the next level and we have the rules. And in between those two, we have the intermediate level. So my opinion is that we need to, that is the level that we need to develop. We know the overarching do's and don'ts. We know that we are not supposed to, we must follow do no harm. And then underneath that, we know that we're not supposed to participate, to offer our opinions. But it's this whole middle area that is quite gray for us. We don't have a lot of information and research in that area. So what I think is that this is the area that needs to be developed, the intermediate ethical concepts. There's a woman named Babot. She's a French woman. I'm not sure we're pronouncing that right, but Babot, perhaps?
The correct spelling is B-E-B-E-A-U. So if we talk about another question from the chat box, if we talk about the values and that we all have to agree to change, it's the perfect that often the people that we work with are so used to that whole concept of role, particularly some of our communities. And it's often based on a very black and white structure. So how do we describe our values and the reason behind them, and then that could really affect how people view us as well. And this is Robyn speaking. Yes, it can have a very positive approach if we start borrowing their language. For example, the concept of informed consent. Instead of saying, well, I'm advocating for the deaf person, no other profession really speaks like that. But if we approach the doctor and saying, I'm concerned about informed consent for this patient, and I am recognizing that the deaf individual may not have full understanding, that they may help with some of those with some of the professionals really understanding what we're saying, rather than saying, well, we're a member of the team, or we're functioning as a conduit or an ally. But using their words and borrowing their terminology, they can actually really help us get to our our common goal. And I think that's where the feeling is. This is Amy speaking. Yes, is that often we have very similar goals, and that we do want to work together, and we do have a system understanding. Right. This is Robyn. Right. Many of us walk into multitudes of systems and don't necessarily understand how they function or even the values. And we're making decisions that are having effect on the system. And I'm not placing blame on one or the other, but it's something how we have to develop how we understand the values and what these systems work. For example, we talk about medical environments and the concept of rationing limited resources. For example, we go into triage environments where a patient shows up and wants kind of treatment or service, and that's fine, but often individuals have to wait for a long amount of time because the staff is addressing more pertinent needs. or people who are sicker than that individual. A lot of patients in general, or even interpreters, are often saying, oh, that this is so unfair, and it's not the right approach. But if you focus it on the concept and the value of rationing resources based on need and urgency, we would have a better understanding of their approach.
There's a question related to flexibility. Each situation requires a different kind of flexibility depending on the environment. And the question is, how do you set up what are the lines that are drawn if we adapt to situations and metaphors? What roles do we attempt to adapt to? How do we learn how to behave in different situations? Boundaries. That is really the metaphor there, boundaries. Sometimes we don't understand we don't understand the meaning of that. We understand the consequences, and it depends. We have to figure out in each situation, if I do this, then what is going to be the consequence that comes from that? But if we talk about boundaries, the word boundaries itself is a metaphor, but it's not taken from normative ethics. It's taken from descriptive ethics. So we have to think about what we mean by that, boundaries. What does that mean? It means we can't practice out of our area of expertise, right? And then we have to look at what the consequence will be. So we have to figure out how to adapt and translate that, adapt that into the practice of sign language interpreting. So it requires that we identify or know and be able to know our area of expertise. And each interpreter will be different as well. For me, I may know a lot about one area, and another interpreter might not have expertise in that same area, or vice versa, and that's fine. So each interpreter is going to have to figure out their area of expertise and what their boundaries are. And if it's a unique situation, you might need to let them know, I might not be the best interpreter for this situation. Whatever is going to be helpful for the deaf individual, we want the person that knows most about that topic. All right, I think it's time to wrap up questions and comments now. And if there are any other questions or comments you want to add, Robyn, to wrap things up? I'd like to offer my email address if you'd like to Google me or be in touch. Actually, I do want to add one more thing in summary. If I can you can, don't worry about the PowerPoint. We can just add one more thing in summary. So we have these summary points on the PowerPoint. And that is these are taken from my presentation in English. So I think it would be very good for people, not right now necessarily, but if you want to look and see if we covered everything, you can compare what my goals would be in English versus what you saw tonight in ASL. And then if you'd like to contact me, I'm happy to respond if you contact me through email, if you want to discuss anything about articles or research. And you can feel free to Google me. It's, it's RKDNSS. What is it? Yes. At RIT.edu. Okay, and we'll make sure that gets out to everyone in the Dropbox then too. Anything else you'd like to add, Robyn, before we close? I wish we had gotten farther, so I apologize we didn't get through more material. And this is Amy. That's all right. You've given us plenty to think about for tonight, plenty to process. Using the metaphor, we'll be percolating like a coffee pot, to use a metaphor for how we're feeling this evening. So we're very thankful to have the technology support from the university and from the team, Carrie Woodruff, and all the people who have helped this evening with all the details. Thank you so very much. And for the interpreters, we're We're very happy for all those people that have been on the front lines this evening, and for the interpreters' willingness to have their work out on the front lines this evening. So thank you for the captionists, for everyone else, and we'll see you next time.